The billionaire had just fired the quiet single father in front of everyone when her 8-year-old daughter suddenly broke free from her nanny's hand, ran across the marble lobby, and threw both arms around the man's waist. The entire building seemed to stop breathing. The little girl, who had barely trusted anyone since her mother's divorce, buried her face against the man's chest as if she had finally found the one place in the world where she felt safe. And when the billionaire looked into the former Navy SEAL's eyes and saw tears he was desperately trying to hide, she realized she might have just made the biggest mistake of her life. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our family can continue sharing stories that remind us that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who save us. Her name was Vivienne Ashford, a woman whose face appeared on magazine covers and whose decisions could move millions of dollars before breakfast. At 39, she had built Ashford Meridian Group from a small investment firm into a global empire, becoming one of the youngest female billionaires in the country. She was admired for her intelligence, feared for her determination, and respected for never allowing emotion to interfere with business. But behind the glass walls of her penthouse office and the polished image of a woman who seemed to possess everything was a mother who had become terrified of losing the only person she could not replace. Her daughter, Elowen, had changed after her parents' marriage collapsed. Once energetic and curious, the little girl had become withdrawn, anxious, and almost completely silent around strangers. Doctors had assured Vivienne that there was nothing physically wrong with her, but grief had wrapped itself around Elowen's heart so tightly that even gentle questions often received nothing more than a lowered gaze. That was why Vivienne had become fiercely protective. She had hired specialists, tutors, therapists, private caregivers, and security professionals, believing that if she surrounded her daughter with enough expertise, she could somehow build a wall between Elowen and pain. What she did not understand was that Elowen did not need another expert. She needed someone who knew what it meant to be frightened and still keep going. That person was Callum Reeve. Callum was 36, a single father raising his 6-year-old son, Wesley, after losing his wife to a sudden illness several years earlier. He had served as a Navy SEAL before leaving the military after an injury made it impossible for him to continue active operations. He never talked about his service unless someone specifically asked, and even then he kept his answers short. The scars along his shoulder and forearm were reminders of a life he had deliberately placed behind him. He had learned that surviving something did not mean you stopped carrying it. Sometimes survival simply meant learning how to carry the weight without letting it crush you. After leaving the military, Callum had struggled to find steady work that allowed him to be present for Wesley. Eventually, he accepted a facilities position at Ashford Meridian Group. The salary was modest compared with the company's wealth, but the hours were stable, the benefits helped, and most importantly, he could pick up his son from school every afternoon. He worked quietly, arrived early, completed every task, and never complained. Vivienne barely noticed him. To her, Callum was simply another employee in a building filled with hundreds of people. She knew his name only because of a security report that had recently crossed her desk. Several expensive items had disappeared from an executive conference room, and Callum had been working in the area that morning. The evidence looked convincing. Security footage showed Callum entering the conference room. A missing luxury watch had later been discovered inside a maintenance closet that he had access to. Another employee claimed he had seen Callum near the executive offices shortly before the item disappeared. The company's head of security recommended immediate termination. Vivienne accepted the recommendation without investigating deeply enough. She summoned Callum to the lobby that afternoon, where several senior employees were gathered nearby. Her voice remained controlled as she informed him that his employment was terminated effective immediately. Callum listened without interrupting. His face showed neither anger nor fear, but his hand tightened around the small backpack he carried for Wesley. He had already been told that his son needed new school shoes. He had already calculated how many weeks of rent remained in his savings. He had already promised Wesley that things would be okay. And now the one job that had allowed him to keep that promise was gone. Callum simply nodded, thanked her for the opportunity, and turned toward the exit. Then Elowen appeared. She had been returning from her afternoon appointment with her tutor when she saw him. For several seconds she stood completely still. Then something inside her seemed to break open. She dropped the little stuffed rabbit she was carrying and ran. She ran past the stunned nanny, past 2 security guards, and straight into Callum's arms. He instinctively caught her. Elowen wrapped herself around him so tightly that Callum nearly lost his balance. Her face disappeared against his chest, and her shoulders began shaking. Vivienne stared in disbelief. Her daughter had never done that. Not to a therapist. Not to a teacher. Not even to Vivienne. For months, Elowen had avoided physical affection because she associated sudden closeness with the painful memories of her parents' separation. Yet here she was clinging to a man Vivienne had just fired. Callum looked at Vivienne over the child's head, and the pain in his expression was unmistakable. He gently lowered himself so Elowen could stand on her own, but the little girl refused to let go. Vivienne felt something inside her crack. She had spent months trying to understand why her daughter trusted almost no one, and somehow this quiet maintenance worker had reached her in a matter of weeks without asking for anything in return. Vivienne did not apologize immediately. Pride stopped her. Instead, she ordered an internal review. The truth surfaced the following morning. The security footage had been manipulated. The watch had not been stolen by Callum. It had been moved by a senior executive who was secretly diverting company assets and had planted the evidence to make Callum appear responsible because he had noticed irregularities in several maintenance invoices. The employee who had accused him later admitted that he had been pressured. Vivienne read the report twice. Then a third time. The woman who had built a billion-dollar company by demanding perfection suddenly found herself staring at one simple truth: she had judged a decent man because it was easier than slowing down long enough to discover the truth. She immediately ordered Callum's reinstatement and offered him compensation. But when she found him, he did not celebrate. He was sitting outside the school with Wesley, helping his son tie his shoelaces. Vivienne approached slowly. Callum stood when he saw her. He did not look angry. That somehow made it worse. He told her that he appreciated the correction, but money could not erase the humiliation of being accused in front of his co-workers. He had served his country, lost friends, survived injuries, and rebuilt his life from nothing. Yet what hurt most was knowing that his son had watched him lose the job he depended upon. Vivienne listened. For once, she did not interrupt. She told him she had been wrong. Not the kind of polished apology executives gave when they wanted a problem to disappear, but a genuine admission that her fear for her daughter had made her suspicious of everyone around her. Callum accepted the apology, but he did not immediately accept the job. That decision surprised Vivienne. She had expected him to be grateful. Instead, he told her that he needed to know whether she was offering him employment because she believed in his work or because her daughter had become attached to him. The question struck her harder than any criticism she had received in years. She realized he was right. So she offered him a different position, one that allowed him to oversee security and facilities operations while maintaining his schedule with Wesley. She also asked him to continue spending time around Elowen, but only if he genuinely wanted to. Callum agreed. What happened next changed all three of their lives. Elowen began speaking more. Not all at once. At first, it was only a few words. Then complete sentences. She started drawing again. She began bringing books to Callum and asking him questions about the ocean. Callum never treated her like a fragile child. He treated her like someone capable of healing. He taught her how to breathe slowly when she became overwhelmed. He showed her how to turn fear into a problem that could be solved one small step at a time. He never told her that she should forget the painful things that had happened. Instead, he taught her that painful memories did not have to control her future. Vivienne watched from a distance. At first, she was grateful. Then she became jealous. She noticed how easily Elowen smiled around Callum. She noticed how Wesley and Elowen had become inseparable friends. She noticed how Callum could calm a room without raising his voice. And she began wondering what kind of man she had almost thrown away. But Callum had his own wounds. His wife's death had left him terrified of becoming emotionally attached to anyone again. He had spent years convincing himself that love was something beautiful that could also disappear without warning. He had built a life around responsibility because responsibility was safer than hope. Vivienne recognized that fear because it lived inside her too. She had lost her marriage, but she had also lost trust. Her husband had walked away when life became complicated, leaving her to build an empire while raising a child whose heart was breaking. For the first time, Vivienne realized she had spent years protecting herself from disappointment by becoming impossible to reach. Callum slowly reached her anyway. Their relationship did not begin with grand gestures. It began with ordinary afternoons. Vivienne would sit with Elowen and Wesley while they worked on school projects. Callum would repair a broken cabinet in the study. Sometimes Vivienne would join him, awkwardly holding a tool while he patiently explained what he was doing. She began laughing again. A real laugh. Not the controlled smile she used at business dinners. Not the polite expression she wore for photographs. A laugh that surprised even her. Months passed. The company's internal investigation eventually exposed the executive who had framed Callum. Vivienne could have destroyed him publicly, but instead she handled the matter legally and quietly, refusing to become cruel simply because someone had tried to hurt her. That decision was one of the greatest signs of her transformation. She no longer wanted power simply because she possessed it. She wanted to use it responsibly. One warm afternoon, Elowen stood in the garden outside Vivienne's home holding a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of drawings she had made during the months when she could barely speak. She handed the box to Vivienne. The final drawing showed 4 figures holding hands. Elowen, Vivienne, Wesley, and Callum. Vivienne stared at it, tears filling her eyes. She finally understood what her daughter had been trying to say all along. Family was not always something you inherited. Sometimes it was something you built. Callum stood a few feet away, watching quietly. Vivienne walked toward him. She did not offer him money. She did not offer him a position. She simply told him that she was sorry for seeing his uniform as a resume instead of seeing the man beneath it, sorry for assuming wealth made her judgment better than everyone else's, and sorry that fear had made her forget that kindness was a form of strength. Callum looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. He told her that he had spent years believing his purpose ended when he left the SEALs. But perhaps purpose was not something you lost. Perhaps it was something you discovered again. Elowen ran between them and grabbed both their hands. Wesley joined her. And for a moment, the billionaire, the former SEAL, and their 2 children stood together beneath the bright afternoon sun, surrounded not by luxury or military medals or corporate success, but by something far more valuable. A second chance. Vivienne had once believed strength meant never making mistakes. Callum had once believed strength meant never needing anyone. Elowen had once believed silence was the safest place to hide. All 3 learned something different. Strength could mean admitting you were wrong. Strength could mean allowing someone to help you heal. And sometimes the bravest thing a wounded heart could do was open its door again. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before we end, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you believe the greatest lesson of this story was. Was it forgiveness, second chances, kindness, or learning to see beyond appearances? Because sometimes the person we push away is carrying the very kindness we desperately need. Sometimes the person we judge is fighting a battle we cannot see. And sometimes, when life gives us the courage to admit that we were wrong, the door we thought we had closed forever can open again. Vivienne never forgot the afternoon she fired Callum Reeve. But she remembered something even more important. The moment her daughter ran into his arms, she thought she was watching her biggest mistake unfold. Years later, she understood that she had actually been watching the beginning of her family's greatest second chance.